That's fascinating. Now, another thing I really wanted to talk to you about is something that you brought up when you sent the notes to Matt was censorship, and that and self-censorship, which is going on apparently in writer groups and groups of people that are deciding that certain words should be eliminated from a vocabulary and from vernacular, and that you shouldn't discuss certain things anymore. That these things are, it's harming fiction and harming literature, that you can't explore the darker ideas.
You want to see me crucify myself right now?
Yeah.
Okay. This is kind of the career-ending moment. For several years, I was in a writer's workshop, and the core group of us had been meeting since 1990. So this is a workshop that was almost 30 years old. And gradually, people were asking each other not to use certain words. First, nobody really used the N-word, but it was definitely a word you could not bring to workshop. And then in a story, I used the word faggot. And a very good friend of mine said, "You're not bringing that word into workshop. You're not writing anything with the F word." And it just became more and more tightly strictured that way. And so eventually I realized we were kind of writing to make each other happy instead of to kind of confront each other. And one of the writers in our workshop is a writer named Cheryl Strayed, who had written a book called Wild, which was a hugely successful book. It was chosen as an Oprah book, and it will be on bookstore shelves for the rest of history, Cheryl's book Wild. But while she was writing it, she had written a segment about how as a child she would be sat on the sofa with her grandfather, and her grandfather taught her how to masturbate him. And so as a child, she would masturbate her grandfather until he achieved orgasm. And then later, she would find these featherless birds that had fallen out of a nest. And she picked one up, and she knew it would die. So she crushed it between her bare hands. This is a very small child. And she wrote how, as that bird died, crushed between her hands, its death throes, its spasms of death, felt exactly like her grandfather's penis ejaculating in her little hand.
Whoa.
That was the best thing she ever wrote. And her editor at Knopf said, "That is not going in this book because we want this book to be a big book. And if we see you jerking off your grandfather and then killing baby birds, that is not going to make Oprah Winfrey happy." So it was a magnificent piece of writing and a magnificent kind of parallel and awareness for a child to have. And this juxtaposition of sexual abuse and death was magnificent. Oh my God, it worked on every level. But the publisher said this is not going to be in the book.
Did she send it to you, or did she show it to you?
She brought it to workshop and she read it. There was even a newspaper reporter present there. And we all realized it was fantastically powerful. But then she said, they won't take this. This can't go in.
Wow. Did she do anything with it? Did she publish it online or?
No. And there were so many parts of that book that were so much better than what they actually did publish.
Really?
And so it's that kind of censorship where you're trying to reach a reader standing in line at Starbucks, and this has got to go in that point of purchase stand, and it's got to be a face out. And I understand for a long time, if you wanted a face out at Barnes & Noble, especially on the Discover New Writers face out stack, you could not have the word fuck on the first page because they did not want people picking up that book and opening it and seeing the F word, that just did not fit their corporate culture. And so, so much of this censorship is because people really want to reach the largest audience without offending people.
Whew. But there's giant problems with that, right? I mean, one of the more fascinating things about books is that the story plays out in your mind.
Exactly. The nature of consumption makes it about the only medium in which you can go to those places.
Yeah, literally. You couldn't, there's no way you would be able to find, to put that in a book, her story about a grandfather and the bird. Maybe you could put the bird in, but the grandfather part, there's just no way.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm telling stories out of school, but it's such a perfect example of that kind of self-censorship. And it's also something so magnificent that I feel it should come out. It should sort of be stated. I don't want to steal her thunder. I want to honor the story. But it's like so many stories that people tell me. I'm kind of seen as a safe person, kind of a degraded monster maybe. But as a degraded monster with no self-esteem whatsoever, they feel safe telling me these things because in a way they probably feel a little morally superior to me.
Why do you think people would consider you a degraded monster?
Because I can read a story like Guts that is so completely humiliating. Because as I read it, it's in the first person, so people more or less assume that it's my story, even though it's stories garnered from many different people. But the fact that I'm presenting it means that I'm the person that is losing face. And afterwards, people feel like they can risk losing face by telling me their story. That's very much like the Guts story.
So when someone is writing something that's deeply disturbing like that, when you hit those parts of your mind and you come to this pathway, do you say, well, no one's ever going to allow this to be in a book? No one's ever. Do you consider those thoughts, or do you just go through with it first and then review it, or do you not do that at all?
My formative years were the punk years, the 70s into the 80s. And we always used to have a saying, people would say, don't hit the brake until you hear a glass break, or don't stop until you hear a glass break. And so I always think the point of writing is to coach yourself to that point that you would never have gone voluntarily, and also to coach your reader to the point where the reader would never have gone voluntarily. In a story like Guts, it's very funny on the front end. And if you told people on the front end where it was going to go, they'd never read that story. But it's very funny and charming and well-paced on the front. And then once people realize where it's going to go, they're already trapped. And so in a way, it's
you
a
seem
way
to enjoy that, though. You, like the way you said they're already trapped, you seem to take some satisfaction in that.
But in writing it, I'm also sort of springing the trap on myself, starting down a path that I have no idea is going to be so humiliating or so emotionally upsetting or so dark. Because if I did, I would never go down that path.
When you write a story like that, how much of it do you plan out in advance?
I might plan out up to the end of the second act. At the moment of greatest crisis, this will happen. In Fight Club, the moment of greatest crisis is going to be when everyone in the support groups figures out that this guy is lying to them. And they're all given the choice of either accepting him for his transgressions or rejecting him. Same thing in Choke. There's going to be that moment when people realize that he has faked choking and that he's made them into a fake hero. And they're going to either kill him or accept him. And so I typically know that the second act is going to end with a transgression being revealed. But beyond that, I don't want to know, because I want the story to complete itself with its own momentum at that point. And if it doesn't surprise me beyond the second act, then it's not going to surprise the reader.
Do you have like a storyboard laid out? And do you use like index cards or anything to figure out where things are going? Or do you just kind of,
No, that's part of the glory, is that whenever I get stuck, I go to the gym and I say, okay, I'm working on this scene where this happens and this happens and this happens. And my friends will say, there'll always be somebody there with a really fresh take and life experience who can say, well, have you thought about this happening? And it will take the story in a direction that is so unexpected because it's not from my experience. And that's the glory. And they feel like they've contributed. They're so happy. And I'm happy to spend time among people. And I'm happy to have the story complete in a way that I never, ever could have anticipated.
That's fascinating. So you do it at the gym?
Yeah, the gym is really great because you're around people and you have these recoveries between sets, so you have a little time to talk. And at the same time, you have, during the exercise itself, you have time to think. And so it paces the talking versus the thinking. And it's also kind of highly oxygenated and it's physically active. And your mind is kind of, your mind is not engaged with something else. Your mind is kind of disengaged like it is while you're taking a shower.
Yeah, a lot of people like to walk. They like to read a little bit of it, and then walk and bring a recorder or their phone to record on. I think probably along the same lines.
Charles Dickens walked somewhere between 12 and 20 miles a day as he wrote.
Whoa.
And the Lakeland poets walked constantly. I mean, walking is a big part of writing.
Anything physical, right? Like anything where you're forcing your body to move, forcing the blood to flow.
And also mindless. So it allows your mind to wander.
Yeah.